Welcome into the show. Before I jump into today's topic, I just want to say thanks to all the people who live nearby and from around the country that have responded to the devastation that Hurricane Helene has caused here in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. This is going to be a long-term problem. Flooding has literally swept away whole towns. It's unreal. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the pictures and videos. It has destroyed the interstates that connect East Tennessee to Western North Carolina. We've seen people fly in supplies. People have raised money all over the country, and certainly people have been praying for our area. So I just want to say thanks for all the prayers and all of the support. Well, we are a month away from the election, and so I want to talk about the idea today that is kind of floating around. You hear a lot in Christian circles about this, of whether or not a Christian has a responsibility to vote. In the last few elections, about 2 out of every 5 self-professed Christians just didn't take advantage of their opportunity to vote, and 1 out of every 5 are not even registered. Now, people make arguments for why Christians don't really need to vote. They say things like, there's verses that say, not by might or power, but by the Spirit. So we shouldn't even try to worry about secular power structures. Or they talk about how Jesus led a spiritual movement and was not really interested in earthly power. And many Christians are so discouraged with the choices that we have to vote for that they just believe it would be better not to vote. So what does the Bible say about this issue? Well, I want to just kind of break down some general principles that I think relate. And the first one is voting is a stewardship issue. I really believe that. I believe that voting is a stewardship issue. Now, the Bible, first of all, does not talk much about the idea of voting. We see people coming together and deciding who will lead them in the Old Testament a few times. There's not really votes. It's kind of a mob. We see the church coming together to decide crucial issues like whether or not circumcision is required for Gentile believers. But again, those really weren't votes necessarily. Most of the power structures in biblical cultures did not include the opportunity for their citizens to vote on their rulers. They were kings, and maybe it was passed on to successive generations, that kind of thing. So it wasn't necessarily a vote. However, in our country, we do have the opportunity to vote and influence who rules over our culture, and that means that we have the opportunity to shape the direction of our culture by choosing how our nation is led. And in Matthew 25, Jesus gives us the parable of the stewards, and he shows us that we're going to answer to God with what we did with the opportunities and the resources that God gives us. And frankly, not voting seems awfully similar to the guy who just hides his portion in the ground and doesn't seek to make a difference with it. And so I really think that voting is one of these opportunities and resources that God has provided you in this country that you're going to have to give an answer for, of how you used it and what you did with it. Another important principle from Scripture that relates to this issue is just the idea of being salt and light that we see in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, starting verse 13 says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So Jesus seems to be talking about our good deeds influencing the culture around us. But it would make sense that any opportunity we have to influence our culture in the right direction or hold back a trend of our culture that's going in the wrong direction would be part of what he's talking about here. Light pushes out darkness. Salt preserves something good. And so I think that this is a salt and light issue. Now, I want to say about that as well, that a lot of Christians are killing their light by how they handle themselves politically online. So I just want to mention that. Smart aleck comments, hateful comments, that kind of, I'm not saying that you can't post a principle that hey, just so you know, like, freedom of speech is important. Like if you don't allow somebody to disagree with you and you want to shut down misinformation, then you're opening up an opportunity for a few people to decide, and that opens the door for totalitarianism, and that's bad for everybody. Like sharing principles like that, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that sometimes some of the ways that we call out people, make fun of people, that kind of thing, I don't think that's helping anything. And so I think sometimes we do hurt ourselves as far as the light that we are in our culture. But I do think voting is an opportunity to be salt and to be light in our culture and to hopefully push back some of the darkness. Another biblical issue that is relevant here is that we're required to act when people are in danger or when evil is rising, okay? So Proverbs 24, starting verse 10, it says, "If you falter in a time of trouble, how small is your strength? Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering towards slaughter. If you say, 'But we knew nothing about this,' does he who weighs the heart does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who guards your life know it? Will he not repay everyone according to what they have done?" And so basically he's indicating, you say, well, I didn't know about it. And he's saying, look, don't give me that because God actually knows your heart. He knows you knew. And so you're going to be held accountable for what you've seen and what the trends that you see happening that you did not stand up against. And so I think this passage is so powerful when you really think about what happened in Germany leading up to and during World War II. Many people in Germany saw what was happening and they didn't stand up and do anything to stop it. And there's this famous quote by Edmund Burke where he says, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And I think this verse flies directly in the face of that, saying that's not an option. For a Christian, that's not an option. When we see what's coming down the pike, like we have to do something about it when we see that it is a destructive thing. And so we're facing an election where freedom of speech is on the ballot. We know what happens in cultures where people are no longer allowed to say things that the government doesn't like. Like we know where that goes, and it's ugly. It's ugly. Millions of people die when cultures do those kinds of things. And that's just the first step towards totalitarianism. We're facing an election where mutilation of confused children is on the ballot, where abortion up to birth and possibly allowing a child to die after an unsuccessful abortion is on the ballot, where parents losing control of children if they don't agree with the current madness in our culture is on the ballot. And so there are many evil things that are being promoted right now that need to be stopped, and a Christian has to use their vote to help stop that. And so I would argue that you need to use your vote wisely to stop it. Going and throwing your vote away on a third party that has no chance of being elected is the same as just helping the party that is promoting all of this kind of things get elected. So we have to be very, very smart about this process. Another key principle is that we're called to love God and love people. And I think we often see politics as just this nasty monster that we don't want any part of. We don't want to be, but really politics is just the way that we choose to relate to each other as a culture. And so political decisions affect people. And we care about people. That's why we have to be involved. So as Christians, we can't really divorce ourselves from this process. We can't really just say, well, I don't care about politics. Politics affects people. And so therefore you have to care about politics because God requires that you care about people. Micah 6:8 says, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." To act justly right now, when you think about unborn babies, when you think about kids being taught all kinds of confusion about what they are and drastic steps to, again, mutilate them before they even could make decisions for themselves. Like when you look at some of the evil that's happening, like to act justly is somewhat clear cut. Jeremiah 29, starting in verse 7, says this, "Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you will prosper too." Now, I'm always very careful. We've talked about biblical interpretation here on the podcast. I'm passionate about that. I'm a freak about it. And so right up front, we're going to say that this is Jeremiah 29 talking to Israel, right? About how they should spend their time in exile in a foreign land. So this is not directly related to us, but the principles are so interesting because it's so similar to a Christian living in a secular country. And even though things aren't ruled perfectly, and even though the nation we live in doesn't really think the way that God thinks, we should still actively seek what is good, healthy, and right for the land that we live in. And so I think that because of that, again, political decisions affect people, and we care about people, so we have to use the opportunities that we have to do what is good for people. And the last point I want to make is a short one again today, but not voting is a form of voting. And it will influence the outcome. We need to take responsibility for our actions as well as our lack of actions. And so when a believer chooses not to vote, it's basically a vote for the least Christian candidate. Think about that. When you withdraw your influence, instead of it being a positive one for the side that could possibly defeat the least Christian option, now it's just a zero, which means that the votes on the other side are more powerful because your vote has been removed. And so even if you're in a state where the more biblically conservative side has no chance of winning, and you just think, man, my vote doesn't matter anyhow, here's the thing. If people see the margins for that other side shrinking from election to election, it will embolden the people that agree with you. It will embolden them to make sure they come out and vote next time. You can help people who have that feeling of my vote doesn't matter, my side loses my state all the time. Like, you can help them begin to think, wait, it doesn't have to be that way. And I wonder how many Christians and people who agree with Judeo-Christian values are just beginning to kind of shrink back and go, I'm not even going to bother to run over there to vote today. And so anything you can do to even shrink their margin to embolden other people is huge. And the same is true in a state where, you think, well, I could skip voting and the more biblically conservative side is going to win anyhow. But if those margins start shrinking on the side that the more biblically conservative side, it's going to embolden those who do not agree with you to make sure they vote next time. Not to mention that it's always good if the candidate can win not just the Electoral College, but the popular vote as well. And so those are just some principles that I think apply to why I really think Christians should vote. Now, I saw some debates online. Is it a sin not to vote? I don't necessarily know about sin. I think it's one of those stewardship issues where I think you're going to answer for not using the opportunities and the resources that you had to make a difference in our culture. Here's the deal, though. The number one way that we are called to influence our culture, I say this all the time, is by spreading the gospel. Some Christians are extremely political, but they haven't led anyone to the Lord in decades. And all they want to do is crow about what's wrong with policies and things like that. And I get that. I understand all that. I'm in tune with that as much as anybody. But the problem is they're not actually changing the culture. The only way to really change the culture is to change hearts and lives. And so, like I say all the time, anything that you can get done politically can just be changed right back in the next election when somebody else gets elected. At the same time, we are called to use whatever rights and abilities we have to shape our culture for good, or at least stop, all-out slide into evil. So I want to encourage you as a believer to use the right to vote that has been given to you. You don't have to love either candidate, but help elect the one that is not pushing the most evil agenda and has the most realistic chance of getting elected. And if you have never led somebody to the Lord, start learning to have sane spiritual conversations, not just throwing Jesus quips at people, dropping gospel bombs on people, but having good conversations where you genuinely care about the person, you listen to the person, you ask good questions, and you proceed at the rate that they are responding to the Holy Spirit. Start learning to do that. In fact, we'll probably talk about that on the podcast at some point. But start learning to do that, because that is really what matters. In the long term, that's going to matter way more than anything that happens in an election. But elections do matter. They do shape where we're headed, and you can just see we are headed in some really dark places as a culture right now. So that's all the time I've got today. Thanks for watching. Make sure that you like, subscribe, share the podcast, and do me a favor, especially if you listen on Apple, Spotify, that kind of thing, make sure that you go out and rate it as well. And we will see you next Friday.